Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Capital League Insight series of webinars. The topic for today's discussion is Sensex at 50,000. What lies ahead? So let me start with a little background. The Indian economy, corporate profitability, as well as broader stock markets were seen to be rebounding from October 2019. As a result, we saw the markets begin 2020 on a happy note, with Sensex nearing 42,000 levels in January of 2020. Then COVID struck and we witnessed the worst fall of the decade with a steep 38% correction from 42,000 on Sensex to nearly 26,000 level on 23rd March, wiping out more than 3 years of gains. Let us fast forward to today. Despite all the odds, Sensex has sharply rebounded, doubled from the March lows, and has crossed the psychological barrier of 50,000, all in less than a year. So today, naturally, the question on top of everybody's mind is, what lies ahead? To help us understand this roller coaster ride and crystal ball gaze into the future, we have with us today Nilesh Shah, Group President and Managing Director, Kotak Mutual Fund. Thank you for joining us today, Nilesh. Welcome to the session.
Thank you, Rajul, for inviting me here.
Not at all. It's our pleasure. So before we start the discussion, I would like to mention that we shall have a 20-minute question and answer session towards the end. So request all the guests to type your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens and address it to the panelists. I repeat, please address your questions to the panelists only. We shall also be conducting 3 opinion polls during our session. So let's start off with our first opinion poll now. Can we have the opinion poll, please? Okay, so the statement on your screens reads, the economic situation on ground is very bad and there is a serious disconnect with the stock market bull run. Whether you agree or disagree with the statement and submit your response. So let's wait for the results. Okay, so Nilesh, 72% of the audience does feel that there is indeed a serious disconnect between the economy and the markets. So I would request, why don't you start by giving us a perspective on this extreme market movement resulting into disconnect? What has changed in the last 1 year?
So Rajul, relatively, there are 2 parts of economy. One which is badly impacted because of COVID-19 and one which is actually benefiting because of COVID-19. For example, during lockdown phase, pharma, FMCG, and technology industry were doing extremely well. They had virtually no side effect of COVID-19. On the other hand, technology, retailing, tourism, travel, hotel, these are the industries which were hit very badly by COVID. Fast forward today, the large companies are benefiting from COVID-19 after effects. Small and medium enterprises are suffering from after effects. Now, if we talk to large companies, they will say we never had anything like this before. In September quarter, Nifty 50 companies recorded profit of 1,04,000 crore, highest ever in their history. December quarter, against all expectations, they recorded 1,21,000 crore profit, highest ever. March quarter, they are expected to generate 1,30,000 crore profit, highest ever. What were Nifty earnings expectation in FY23 is now materializing in FY21, last quarter annualized. So there is one segment of economy which is doing extremely well. Obviously, there is another segment which is not doing well. But if you see on an overall basis, clearly V-shaped kind of recovery, slowly and steadily improving. Let me just portray the headlines of Jan and Feb 21. GST collection of Jan, highest ever at 1,20,000 crore. This is 4-month election. E-way bill generation, which represents manufacturing, 10% up year on year in January at all-time high level. Railway freight loading, 10% up year on year in January. And now year-to-date railway freight loading is higher than previous year. Power consumption in Feb at 189 gigawatt is highest ever. FX reserves, including forwards, are at $625 billion. Unemployment now is below pre-COVID level as per CAMI data of January. If you look at Nomura Business Resumption Index, it is now above pre-COVID level. So undoubtedly, there are some scares in economy, and which is why people feel that on-ground situation is not that good. But if we see on a holistic basis, I think in the December quarter, Indian GDP will show positive growth. And March 21 quarter, again, it will show positive GDP growth.
Okay. So what do you think were the other factors which actually took market where they are today? I mean, was it, this is like you're talking of the results that this has happened, but as expected, markets didn't actually stay, at those low levels. What was the reason for that? I mean, this we are talking of now, but markets started moving much earlier.
So there were three things which came together for market to be pulled up. One is money flow, second is sentiment, and third is fundamentals. From a money flow point of view, in the month of March, FII sold 60,000 crore. But from 5th November onwards, they have been virtually buying about 3,000 crore on an average every day. In last 12 months, they have brought 250,000 crore of Indian equity. This is one of the highest ever flows. More importantly, this time retail investors is ahead of FPIs. They have been buying equity directly and via mutual funds in loads. Between FPI and retail investors, $50 billion came into Indian equity, pulling the market up. As I mentioned, sentiment started improving somewhere post-lockdown. There was fear about COVID-19 sweeping. There were Western experts who were predicting dire scenario for India. Unfortunately, they didn't look at their own house. As active cases started dropping, as confidence started coming that we can come victorious over COVID-19, slowly the sentiment lifted. And it got further boosted when we saw economic recovery month after month. And in Jan-Feb headlines, that sentiment is very positive. And finally, the corporate earning. When June quarter results came, corporate earnings dropped 30% plus to 58,000 crore. There was despair. People thought that now corporate India will not recover. But surprisingly, in September quarter itself, corporate India recovered and posted record profit. When September results came, people said, no, this is one time. You have cut salary. You are not spending on advertising, travel, Diwali gifts, business promotion. This can't sustain. In December advanced tax number, they got the first hint that no, this is sustaining. In Jan and Feb, when December quarter results came, the eyes were widespread at 1,21,000 crore profit. And now people are revising their earnings upgrade. If you look at on a trailing basis, Sensex, Nifty are trading somewhere around 45 to 50 times. When you look at forward, they are all trading between 20 to 25 times, depending upon what estimate you take. I have never seen this wide divergence between past profitability and future profitability. So there are money flow, positive sentiments, and fundamentals coming together to pull the market up, and which is why markets have been giving steady recovery month on month.
So Nilesh, when we talk of corporate earnings, then, being in the industry, we've always said and believed in that stock prices eventually are slaves of earnings in the long run. And that is the most important fundamental driver. But, like you are saying, contrary to expectations, the corporate sector has bounced back faster and more efficiently. We've seen margin expansion also. So for the first time in probably 6 years, we are seeing that, there are earnings upgrades. and we have seen a pickup in margins and earnings growth for last 2 consecutive quarters. So what are the key factors you would attribute this to? And second, I mean, most important question is that, is this trend sustainable? You talked about pent-up demand or, margin expanding between, companies who are not probably spending as much on other things. But going forward, once things become normal, do you think this will be sustainable?
So on a broad basis, corporate India has benefited because of tight cost control. Almost every company tightened cost significantly, whether it was renegotiating rental agreements, whether it was cutting advertising and business promotion expenditure, whether it was cutting salaries and wages, whether it was taking out deadwood in the organization, whether it was working capital management, whether it was power saving, whether it was interest cost saving, everything came together. I have heard of companies which, even during lockdown, when they had to operate, they ensured that the lighting bill was minimum. Variety of tools were employed to cut costs ruthlessly. And that has made corporate India fighting fit. They have saved money on every possible thing. And this is likely to sustain from a margin point of view, not from a margin growth point of view. If you cut cost to the bare, then there's no room for further reduction in cost. So the companies will undoubtedly look to maintain margin. And more importantly, Rajul, this profitability growth has come when sales are still negative. In the quarter ending September, if I remember correctly, sales were down 7%. In December quarter, sales are still down 1 or 2%. It's only in March quarter where sales will turn positive. Now, in a falling sales, if you are able to increase margin, there's no doubt in my mind that in rising sales, we will be able to maintain margin.
So what about top line growth? Do you see that improving with time? Or, I mean, the biggest challenge for the last 5 years has been demand. So how do you see that panning out?
So on an overall basis, undoubtedly demand will bounce back. Partly sales volume will rise because commodity prices are up and inflation will push your revenue. But Tata Steel's revenue will rise because steel prices are up. Hindalco's revenue will rise because aluminium prices are up. It's not that that will be coming from volume alone. It will be volume plus value. More importantly, I think now we are seeing demand generation coming back. If unemployment levels are going below pre-COVID level, undoubtedly there will be demand. And we have already started seeing supply side issues. For example, in automobiles now you have 5 months waiting period because they are not able to produce as many cars as there is a demand. Similarly, in some of the consumer durable goods, if you go to online or otherwise, you don't get immediate delivery. There is a waiting period. It's not as big as motor car, but it is still not instant delivery. It shows that consumer durable demand also is very strong. I was trying to book a hotel, towards the Christmas time, and everything was packed. I couldn't get one. Now, this shows that there is a demand bouncing back even in a thing like a hotel. Now, if you try to book airline ticket today, there is demand. There are certain sectors where it is getting full. So my feeling is that we are now going into this virtuous cycle where there is demand coming through and supply is emerging, and that demand and supply will create a virtuous cycle of job creation, investment, and more demand. So we are slowly and steadily turning the wheel.
You talked about commodity prices going up. So they also are inputs in a variety of industries, including you talked about automobiles. So they are saying their cost structures have gone up. They're trying to pass on the price increases to the consumers. So do you think that could be a dampener for demand?
So this is the market force. Today, for example, in crude prices are up because demand is up, and in Texas, a major oil producing nation, there is an oil producing region, there is a natural calamity. But at the same time, oil prices are also up because Russia, Saudi have cut the production. Now, will Saudi ramp up the production to cool down the prices? My feeling is yes. They also don't want crude prices to go to a level where alternate fuel comes into play and there will be impact. Today, entire Germany is covered under snow and hence their solar and wind power has come under pressure. Now, there is a demand for crude, there is demand for gas, but eventually there will be ramp up of production as prices remain higher. The same thing is happening on steel side. When the prices crashed, many inefficient capacities went out of production. As prices rise, those will start coming back into production. So we will have to live with this commodity cycle. For the timing, it looks like the demand side pressure will keep commodity prices elevated. But I don't think so. I can factor in an Excel sheet that steel prices will continue to rise 30% year on year. Well, that's never going to happen. As prices rise, dormant capacity will come into play and alternatives will also come into play.
Okay, that sounds like a relief. Nilesh, in the last 1 month, if we come back to just, recent past, there was our budget and a lot of policy announcements were there. And even before the budget, government has been coming out with certain major policy reforms. And I believe that also boosted the market sentiment. Our stock markets were up like 10% right after the budget. So could you elaborate a bit more on that why, suddenly we saw improved market sentiment on mere announcements? I mean, implementation is still some way away.
So Rajul, you made a very important point. This time market is up based on the announcements in the budget, but we need to execute it. See, intent is always rewarded in market, but eventually market also wants execution. So compared to last year, we have to ensure that LIC gets listed, BPCL gets privatized, Container Corporation, Shipping Corporation, Pawan Hans, Nilanchal Ispat, IDBI Bank, 2 unnamed PSU banks and 1 insurance company is also privatized. Now, let me highlight some of the nuances of budget which probably has not been recognized. Rajul, you have been working all throughout your career and you don't think twice when you have to work late in the night. You can work in your office late in the night. There is no restriction. But if Rajul was a factory worker, she would not have been allowed to work in a factory after 8 p.m. Now, see the dichotomy which we have created. In airline, hotel, banking and financial services, mutual funds, IT business, KPO, BPO, we allowed women to work in night shift. We allow women to fly aircraft in the night, auto rickshaw in the night, drive truck on highways in the night, but we don't allow them to work during night shift in factory. Now, this created a very imbalance in our labor force, and industries which were dependent upon women, like ready-made garments, could never compete with global market. The Bangladeshi, the Vietnamese factories will work in 3 shifts. We will work in single shift. Net, we will be not competitive. This is the first budget where we have removed that deadwood of last 70 years. We have now empowered our women in true sense. In IT industry, when we allowed women to work in night shift, we have seen companies like TCS employing 175,000 women. These are the women who won't be dependent upon their father, brother, husband for financial independence. They will become financial independent on their own. That's true empowerment. Now, what we have done on IT side, we have done on factory side. Imagine the empowerment it will do to the woman. That's why market is liking this budget. If you look at the other part, this is the budget where we have removed our deadwood of 70 years. Every time finance minister in the budget has said that I want to spend more, but I'm constrained by money. You were never constrained by money. You were constrained by your imagination. For 70 years, you didn't use your imagination to spend money. Now, in this budget, we are saying that, look, we will monetize assets. We will monetize real estate, which is lying in surplus in railway and defense. In every single city, defense cantonment has now come into the heart of the city. Is there a need for that? In every city, you see railways sitting on huge commercial valuable properties. Can it be monetized? We are now monetizing our oil and gas pipeline, warehouses, data center, power transmission line, roads, ports. And this is how you have to recycle money. You build assets, monetize it, put that money into building new assets. For 70 years, India remained infrastructure deficit. Power cuts, we accepted as a norm of life. It happens. Road congestion, we accepted it as a norm of life. Flyover getting built at a snail's pace, we accepted it as a norm of life. Now we are saying that no, we are changing. We will monetize old assets and fund new assets. This is how we will move from infrastructure deficit to infrastructure surplus. Now, this needs execution, undoubtedly. But if this budget is executed even 60, 70%, I think we will see new India, just like 1991-92's Dr. Manmohan Singh's budget, which liberated India from license permit Raj.
So, okay, that sounds interesting that, this government has been there for a while. They have been making announcements, and finally, they have kind of come out of their shell and doing something which they have not done, or we as a country have not done for 70 years. So that is, let's say, the fundamentals which will play out over the next few years in the long run, medium to long run. We also say that, we may have the best of fundamentals, but without liquidity, markets do not, move the needle. So you had touched upon this initially when you spoke just now about global liquidity. So let's talk a bit more on that. We saw this phenomenon play out during the global financial crisis also in 2018 until 2013, when was followed by unwinding of liquidity, leading to severe volatility in financial markets. So how do you see the entire situation related to liquidity panning out this time around?
So Rajul, you have raised a very, very important point. The markets are today supported by flow, sentiment, and fundamentals. But are there no risks in the market? Answer is clearly no. There are some risks. And the most important risk which market is facing is this rise in inflation, rise in interest rates, and change in central bank stance. At the end of the day, make no mistake that today's economic recovery all over the world is based on the steroids given by the central bankers around the world. This is not a natural recovery. This is an induced recovery. The economy seems to have developed muscles because it has been put on steroids. Now, there are always side effects of steroids. In this case, side effects could be commodity inflation. We have seen soft commodity, industrial commodity, crude prices going up. As inflation starts raising his head, can central bankers remain immune to it? Answer is no. They will have to tighten liquidity. They'll have to raise interest rates. That will have material impact on stock market. When you raise interest rates, interest cost goes up, corporate profitability comes down, and equity valuation also suffers. Now, today market is hoping that all central bankers will remove steroids in a very, very calibrated manner. They are expert doctors. They will exactly know when to do what. And hence, the gradual and calibrated removal of steroids like liquidity and interest rates will not disrupt this recovery process. Now, in taper tantrum, Fed did try to warn the market. In 2013, they gave ample warning. They gave very gradual reduction path, and yet markets corrected. I'm sure investors have learned from that experience, and this time when a taper tantrum equivalent reduction happens, they will be a little bit more wiser. But we will have to continue to watch inflation, interest rates, and central bank action to see how they impact our market.
Understood. So now that we have got some great insights into, markets are where they are, and before we move on to the next part of our discussion, let's have our second opinion poll, please. The statement on your screens read, the current valuation levels appear high. One should book profits and reduce allocation to equity. Kindly submit whether you agree or disagree with the statement. While we wait for the results, I would like to request all guests to kindly type your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens and address it to the panelists, please. Okay, so surprisingly, only nearly 50% of the people feel that they want to book profits and reduce allocation to equity, whereas the other half is comfortable staying invested at current levels too. So just, what do you think of, Nilesh, this mixed opinion? Because we do get, these kind of queries from our investors, our clients. What are your thoughts on this, and what would you recommend to the investors?
So my recommendation, Rajul, will be this is fair value market. The market cap to GDP ratio now is almost 100%. In March, it was about 50%. At that point of time, it made sense to be overweight equity despite the negatives on the horizon. And today, it makes sense to book your profit if you're overweight equity. But if you're equal weight equity, then there's no need for any action. And if you're underweight equity, then it is time to invest and bring it to equal weight. There will be undoubtedly ups and downs in the markets, but I believe we are in a phase like 2003 to 2007. India will become the fastest growing major economy in the world over next couple of years. This will create its own excitement. Number two, the world is now viewing India differently. China exported Wuhan virus to the world. Even today, they are not coming clean with World Health Organization. What has happened? Is it a genetically modified virus which escaped from their research facility? Is it a natural virus? There are doubts and they are not coming clean. And yesterday they even made a statement that, WHO should search in US if Wuhan virus originated there. Now, this kind of behavior is unlikely to get rewarded by the global markets. On the other hand, India is providing vaccine to the people. There are 20 countries which have got Indian vaccine. And if world has to win the race against Wuhan virus, it will require Indian vaccine support. Johnson & Johnson has discovered one dose vaccine, and they are talking with an Indian company for manufacturing 60 crore doses. AstraZeneca is already with Serum to manufacture doses. We have developed our own vaccine. Now, the world will differentiate between China and India in the years to come as they recognize that here is one country which is, doing whatever they want to do. They don't want to respect international laws. They don't respect international IPRs. They believe, trade is a one-way street where you welcome Chinese goods, but we won't allow your Amazon, Google, Microsoft to come into our country. On the other hand, there is another democratic country which allows two-way street. If TCS, HCL, Wipro gets business, we also allow Amazon, Facebook, Google in our country. So there will be recognition of India in the world, and that will bring more flows into fastest growing economy. Domestically, we will do well as money comes in. So put all these things together, we are in a phase like 2003 to 2007, where growth was averaging 9% plus, and equity market moved from 3,000 to 21,000. Now 3,000 was a very, very cheap market. 21,000 with the hindsight was a bubble. So I don't expect market to go up 7 times in next 5 years. Well, that's not going to happen because market is no longer cheap today. And people will learn from their experience and will not make a bubble. But will we see multi-year rising market? Answer is quite likely.
Okay, so we have talked about, the factors like global liquidity, government reforms, more importantly, earnings growth, which are, leading to bullishness in the equity markets currently. So when you talk about neutral asset allocation, obviously, if some investors are underweight today, you said that they should go into the markets. So one follow-on question would be that should they make lump sum investments or should they stagger it out? And if they stagger it out, should they do it over the next 4 to 6 weeks or 4 to 6 months? What would you advise?
So if you want fund manager to do the allocation on your behalf, then lump sum investments in balance advantage fund or asset allocator fund is fine. But if you can do allocation on your own, then you can stagger it over next 3 to 6 months. Clearly, there is risk of active second wave of infection. We have seen in some places like Amravati in Maharashtra, cases jumping from 100 to 700 in a very short period of time. I think this is fifth or sixth day where active cases have marginally ticked up all over India in aggregate. So there are events which can influence market, and which is why over next 3 to 6 months, if we can average ourselves into the market through systematic transfer plan, that also will be appropriate.
Okay. So Nilesh, we talked about the markets and the valuations and how we justify current valuations. So on valuations, one thing which is also said is that because interest rates are so low, the discount factor is low, and that is why one is able to justify a much higher valuation, a much higher fee compared to our long-term average, which used to be between 16 to 18 times. So does then, the movement in interest rates also become a risk factor in addition to what you mentioned earlier with regard to inflation and oil prices, etc.?
Undoubtedly, Raju, interest rate will impact corporates and equity markets in two ways. One is interest rate rise, your interest cost goes up and profit after tax comes down. More importantly, as interest rate moves, the discounting rate goes up and your valuation comes down. So put those two things together, interest is a double-edged sword. It hits corporate profitability, it lowers equity valuation. So there will be double effect on equity market. Now, clearly market are pricing in rising interest rate scenario. The 10-year yield in India has moved up by 20-25 basis points from the bottom. And it's probably likely to rise another 25 to 50 basis points over the rest of the year. As long as this movement is maybe, let's say, under 1%, equity markets will not be impacted materially. A 1% move will bring probably 10-15% correction. But anything more than that, then the corrections will be sharper.
Okay, so one needs to watch out for that. So, okay, before we move on to our next part of the discussion, let's have the third opinion poll, please. Okay, the question is that despite the bullish outlook on Indian markets, should one still invest in international funds? While we are waiting for the results, I would like to take this opportunity to request everyone to follow Capital League on LinkedIn for regular market views and information on our upcoming webinars. We shall be posting the LinkedIn page link in the chat window shortly. Okay, that's a good response. 85% of our guests today feel that yes, one should still invest in international funds. And while Nilesh, you would elaborate on that, I would also like to mention that various market experts are of the opinion that just as the last decade belonged to the developed countries, especially the US, the coming decade should belong to the emerging markets. What is your view on this? And other than India, which other markets look exciting to you and why?
So if you look at from 2000 to 2020, over 20-year period, Indian and US markets have delivered similar return. 2000 to 2010, we outperformed US. 2010 to 2020, US outperformed us. So there is always cyclicality in return, but notwithstanding that, one should diversify into offshore market. It gives you exposure to businesses which are not listed in India. For example, Facebook, Google, Tesla. These are the kind of businesses which are not there in India. It also allows you to take country risk away. I mean, we are all bullish on India, but clearly, is there sense in diversifying your asset base? Answer is undoubtedly yes. Now, how should one diversify? Well, Raju, you'll probably remember in 2007, there was a global firm launching their mutual fund in India. And they plastered urban India, Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, saying that, which was the best performing emerging market last year, Iceland, up 108% or something like that. Next year, there was no ice left and there was no land left. Everything melted away. So when you're going offshore, try to be in diversified portfolio. Don't go in single country exposure. Single country exposures will give you high risk and high return. A diversified portfolio will minimize risk and still optimize return. And try to invest in those asset classes which are not available in India. There are technology companies which are not present in India. There are products like timber and those kind of commodities which are not present in India. There are gold mining companies which are not present in India. So essentially, you created a diversified portfolio of local and global, which gives you benefits of diversification and exposure, which are unrelated, which are uncorrelated.
Right. No, that's a useful insight. So you're saying that one should diversify across developed markets and emerging markets, so to say, so that there is a good mix, rather than just going by the expert opinion that this decade will belong to one section and the next decade belongs to the other section. Is that what you are saying, alluding to?
Absolutely.
So, and India comprises only 3% of the entire global market cap. So most investors, traditionally have been invested only in India because this is the market we understand and you don't want to step out of your comfort zone. So I guess this is the right time that products are available and one can take those exposures to various funds, which give you exposure to multitude of economies and countries and industries.
Absolutely. See, earlier, till almost mid-90s, we didn't have FX reserves where we could allow our citizens to take money abroad officially. And which is where there was a completely big Hawala market. And, we used to get some piddly allowance while going abroad, and hence most of us used to access Hawala market. Now with $600 billion reserves, India can afford its citizens to take money abroad. And we should take advantage of the same in diversifying our portfolio.
So part of the returns in the past, from international funds also came from rupee depreciation. But going forward, if the interest rate differential between, US and India dollar and rupee, so between these two countries, if the inflation differential is going to be just like, 2 to 3%, do we assume that maximum this is the kind of, benefit from rupee depreciation we can get?
Absolutely. While right now rupee is on the appreciation mode and RBI is intervening heavily to stop rupee from appreciating against massive flows, the destiny of rupee is to depreciate for exactly the reason you mentioned. There is inflation differentia which pushes rupee to depreciate every year to make or retain India's competitiveness vis-a-vis its partners. There is also productivity differentia. Other companies are becoming far more productive than what India is. And hence, we need to cover through currency depreciation gap in inflation and productivity. I hope, like over the years, inflation gap has narrowed down from 7-8% to now 2-3%. I believe over a period of time, productivity gap will become positive. Today, let's say other countries are becoming 1% more productive than India. Hopefully, there will be time when India will become 1% more productive than rest of the world. And that's how rupee will start, depreciating even at a slower pace. But till such time those things happen, I think it's fair to assume 2 to 3% depreciation of rupee on a yearly basis, though it won't materialize every year. There will be
Yeah.
periods where it will swing on the other side, and there will be
Mm.
periods where it will swing on the depreciating side.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so thanks, Nilesh. This brings us to the end of our discussion. And let's now, look at some audience questions and try to address them. So, okay, let's start with the first question I have in front of me. The question is on performance of broader market. So Nilesh, both globally and in India, we have witnessed extreme polarization in the stock performance in the last 3 years, where a handful of stocks were responsible for bulk of the returns, especially in the indices, and broader markets underperformed. So do you see this trend continuing, or are you expecting something different?
So in Indian context, I think rally has become broad-based. If March to September, October was driven by Reliance, October onwards, Reliance has actually underperformed the market and all other stocks have rallied. In calendar year 2020, small and mid cap delivered better return than large cap. And even in calendar year 2021, the trend continues. So my feeling is that right now we are witnessing a broad-based recovery. Obviously, there will be stocks which will do well and there will be stocks which won't. But on an average, it is a broad-based recovery. It's not concentrated with few stocks. And this trend is likely to persist in the days to come.
Okay, there is a follow-on question on mid-cap companies. So the gentleman is asking, will mid-cap companies without paradigm shift patents or R&D in the pipeline correct? Many have absurdly high P ratios and valuations, just echo segment leaders. An example is paint manufacturers.
So undoubtedly, those kind of valuations cannot sustain. When Indigo Paint gets listed and starts trading at a valuation higher than Asian Paints, there is a problem. When Burger King gets listed at a valuation higher than Westlife, which is McDonald's franchisee, there is a problem. And history has taught us that eventually those bubbles bust. So undoubtedly, there are some excesses in the market where certain stocks, either because of their low floating stock or concentrated holding or selective buying, has resulted into excessive valuation. But those valuations are unlikely to sustain over the years. They can sustain in the short term, but over medium to long term, fundamentals will prevail.
Okay, the next question is to do with global liquidity again. In fact, there are 3 questions on global liquidity. I'm just reading out all 2 and 3 these together. So one is that what percentage of what component of market appreciation do you attribute to global liquidity? And in brackets, he's put steroids. The second is that with this excessive liquidity infusion, will we finally see global pickup in inflation? And I mean, you already talked about it. Does US world carry the risk of hyperinflation? And subsequently, do you see the risk of reverse flow of FII investments?
So as of today, it's very difficult to put a number how much of this excessive valuation is because of the liquidity. If you look at Bank of Japan story, they have been pumping liquidity since 1990. They have been cutting interest rates since 1990. And they have been taking other measures like buying equity probably since 2005. And despite all those things, Japanese equity markets haven't moved much. In fact, it crossed 30,000 Nikkei very recently after a gap of almost 3 decades. It's very difficult to say how much of the valuation expansion is attributable to liquidity enhancement. But directionally, we can always say that yes, central bankers provided put option on market by cutting interest rates and by pumping liquidity. This has created asset price inflation far more than commodity inflation or inflation per se. When this cycle reverses, if at all, then undoubtedly there will be consequences. FPIs, when they bring money, if their bringing money lifts prices, undoubtedly at some point of time they will take out money. Today, FPI investment in India is close to $600 billion. They are not going to keep $600 billion forever in India. If they tomorrow finds a country which is more attractive, they may be tempted to take this money out and put it into that country. So as long as we remain competitive and attractive, we will continue to attract FPI money. And the government has done a great job in enhancing India's weightages in MSCI and FTSE. If you are part of benchmark indices, then to an extent you get a stable allocation.
Understood. So, I mean, there is both a factor of global liquidity as well as the Indian story to the whole, valuation thing or markets being where they are. That was also one of the questions, but I guess that is covered. There's another question on international investing. How would you compare investing in the US markets via investing in India through feeder funds versus investing directly through ETFs or buying, now some of the banks, etc., are giving options to buy stocks directly. Do you see a difference in returns? And I would say one should look at risk also, not just returns.
So, see, I know someone who bought blue chip stocks in US, and that has not been a rewarding experience because in US rally was concentrated in FANG stocks. Now, if you had bought NASDAQ 100 or FANG stocks, you would have made a lot of money. But if you had bought into, let's say, S&P 495, the returns would not have been that spectacular. So if you are going directly into global stocks, please do the research. Please invest in them based on proper research. There will be volatility in those names. They will go up and down. And you must have that kind of research which will allow you to average when prices are down rather than panic and sell it off. ETF versus active fund management. If active fund managers are adding alpha, then it's worth going with them. Otherwise, ETFs are low-cost options and far better. In our case, we have realized that we don't have the research capability for offshore stocks. We are still building that up. And hence, what we have launched is a feeder fund into funds which are managed by other people who are more equipped than us in managing offshore money. Or we are launching ETFs where you don't have to really apply your active fund management skill.
But I guess ETF selection, there's so thousands of ETFs out there. That also then is important, and one should be mindful of that too. So, okay, the next question is coming back to India. You talked about, Nilesh, US, China, trade war, and then, global companies wanting to adopt China plus one policy. So, and even Japan is giving incentives to companies which will, divert imports from China. So the question being asked is, in such a scenario, do you believe the production-linked incentive scheme announced by the government will be make India next popular manufacturing hub after China?
So one, I have no doubt in my mind that PLI scheme will be a great success in developing India's manufacturing base. Now, will we be number 2 after China? That I don't know. That's too ambitious an aim. China is almost now $15 trillion economy. Manufacturing there will be contributing probably $7-8 trillion. Our total economy is $3 trillion. And even if PLI becomes successful, we may go to $5 or $6 trillion. So to say that we will become number 2 in manufacturing after China will be slightly ambitious aim. We should definitely aim towards that, but it is too early to say whether we will achieve it or not. But the structuring of PLI scheme is fantastic, and it will definitely help India expand its manufacturing base. Rajul, if you remember, some years ago, we had launched Textile Upgradation Fund. This was with a view to make India a powerhouse in global textiles. We grow top 3 cotton in the world. Its finest quality, better than Egyptian cotton. We have the largest spinning capacity in the world. We can weave that yarn into fabric, which is at par with the best in the world. Most of the global brands have made in India fabrics. Now, all this thing is low value add. The maximum value add occurs when you can convert that fabric into a garment and then put a brand on it and then sell. A 200-gram t-shirt, when you sell it in pure cotton form versus when you sell it in a branded t-shirt form, you know the price difference. India kept on doing the low-end work and didn't focus on high-end work. And in order to balance that, government came out with Textile Upgradation Fund. It was providing concessional financing for setting up textile factories. The aim was that India will become large textile manufacturer, and this will help India claim its place in global market. Some good entrepreneurs did take advantage of Textile Upgradation Fund and set up new capacities. Majority of entrepreneurs actually gold-plated their plant, siphoned off the money, and created NPS. India didn't become a global textile hub. Now, learning from that, in PLI scheme, government is saying that, look, I'm not offering any incentive for setting up plant. I'm offering incentive only if you manufacture and if you sell. The first PLI scheme was targeted towards 3 industry, bulk trucks, mobile phones, and one more industry. It was based on, this is the allocation, whosoever applies, I will do democratic allocation. The second PLI scheme is far more broad-based. It covers auto components, textiles, electronics, electricals. It's more meritocracy. You produce more, you will get higher incentive. You produce fast, you will get early incentive. There is a competition among companies to claim that incentive. And this, I think, is the biggest differentiator between PLI scheme and Textile Upgradation Fund. Textile Upgradation Fund resulted into some crooks getting rich. PLI scheme will ensure that the country benefits.
Understood. So, I mean, hopefully we would have clicked it the right way this time, and the government is talking of expanding it to several more sectors, which should be useful and should play out as expected. So, Nilesh, one more question here is that when we talk of manufacturing, we typically think of machines and assembly lines. Do you think the visibility India has received as a primary source of vaccines for COVID-19 shall put us on the map for other healthcare related exports?
So we are already pharmacy to the world. Most generic medicines all over the world is made in India. And we have done pretty well on the generic medicine side. Where we haven't done as well is commercializing, let's say, alternate medicine. If you go to most parts of America, you will see yoga studio. Now, yoga is India's gift to the world, but have we commercialized it? Have we got H-1B visa for yoga instructor in US? Answer is no. Have we copyrighted, patented yoga postures, yoga asanas, which will create a sustainable royalty? Now, the entire computer is based on binary code 0 and 1. And as you know, 0 is a gift of India. If we had patented 0, all of us needed no work. So we haven't done this kind of things, but all these things gets noticed by the world. People appreciate yoga, and that's why they are adopting it. This is creating brand India. International Yoga Day again is a step in that direction. Vaccine also will help us expand that brand India. Now we must capitalize that brand India through appropriate developments in the country. We have to ensure that our medicine should be able to move faster. They should not be, stuck in the customs. If I remember correctly, I'm quoting from my memory, but a cargo took about 7 days to clear at a port, whereas air cargo at Bangalore airport could move out in about 3 or 4 hours after reaching airport, and about 18 hours from factory to the aeroplane. Now, in one part of India, we know how to clear cargo in 3 hours. In other part of India, we don't do it even in 7 days. Now, can we merge those two? Not that we should bring 3 hours to 7 day, but we should lift 7 day to 3 hours.
Yeah.
If we do all those things, it will make a difference. Now, as a citizen, also, we have a contribution to make. If you remember, in the 3-4 years before, we have constantly heard Indian companies, factories getting banned by US FDA for various practices. Now, as pharma worker, it is my job to ensure that those practices don't happen, and we present a quality face to the rest of the world. So undoubtedly, vaccines will improve brand India, but we need to ensure that rest of the thing is done so that this can be exploited to the fullest.
Okay, Nilesh, there are a few more questions, so we can extend the session by 5-10 minutes and try to cover them all. So, okay, so the next one is that we have seen a big thrust from the government on infrastructure in this budget. What are the key areas which will create the largest multiplier effect? And I would like to add that that should include job creation as well, because that has been a bane for India till date.
So, in one sentence, India's problem is that there are 15 to 20 crore people employed in agriculture, which are excess over there, and they should move to industry or services. A very simple problem, but very difficult solution. Our second problem on employment is that we have not created high-paying jobs. There are very few high-paying jobs. The third is also about skill. If you see, Rajul, the carpenter, the plumber, the electrician, which comes to your house, my house, they're still carrying 1940s vintage tools. They haven't improved. You know, he will still come with that tester and that screwdriver and start repairing things. Now, how do we ensure that our people are skilled, they get high paying jobs, and we create a virtuous cycle of more jobs creating more demand creating more investment, and more investment in turn creating more jobs? Now, in recent times, government has taken massive steps to build India's infrastructure. We are building more highways than what was added in first 50 years of India's independence. We are building more railways than what was first built in India's first 50 years of independence. I think nothing differentiates more than what I have seen. So currently, Rajul, our goods train run at 21 kilometers an hour. Our railway tracks are filled with passenger trains, and hence goods trains get less priority. When we travel, we do see our train run past ahead of goods train, which will be lying, on a station on the parallel track. Now, this delays exports, this delays goods movement, this increases working capital. Now, Government of India has embarked upon a major infrastructure project called Dedicated Freight Corridor. It will connect Ludhiana to Dankuni near Kolkata in West Bengal and New Delhi to JNPT, Mumbai. This is, and I'm sure you would have seen this video where a double stack container train runs at 100 kilometers an hour on dedicated freight corridor. This DFC was likely to be operational by 2020. Unfortunately, because of land acquisition and COVID-19, it's now going to be operational by June 2022. Once this dedicated freight corridor comes, it's going to revolutionize the Indian manufacturing industry around that area. North is connected to east and west, and what distance used to cover over 7-8 days will now get covered over probably 1.5 days. Now, this is the kind of infrastructure which we are developing. We are slowly and steadily moving from infrastructure deficiency to infrastructure surplus. When I was a kid, Mumbai-Pune was an overnight journey. Today, if I leave at, let's say, 12 o'clock, I'll be in Pune by 3 o'clock. That's the improvement which is happening in India. We are still lagging behind Western world and China in terms of infrastructure, but certainly we are improving.
Is another similar question. This is on real estate reform. So the question is that one major hurdle that industry faces in expansion plans is land. Do you think the government has done enough in real estate reforms to make it attractive for industry to invest?
So undoubtedly land acquisition remains a problem, and that's in some sense price we have to pay for democracy. In China, they will simply stick the notice and the entire village, entire area will disappear. In Sardar Sarovar Narmada Nigam, in the hindsight, we are seeing the benefits of water reaching to deserts of Kutch and Rajasthan and lifting people. It has benefited millions and millions of people, but it was delayed for 6, 7 decades. That's the price we'll have to pay for democracy. Land acquisition in India is never going to be like China. We are a hugely populous country. There are ports, there are protests, there are all kinds of things which will derail this. And this friction will create its own challenge, which people will have to overcome.
Okay,
But if I can just show the model of Sanand versus Sindoor. In Sindoor, people protested against Tata Motors coming and setting up their factory. They fought tooth and nail based on variety of agendas and ensured that they were uplifted. In Sanand, people welcomed Tata Motors. They helped them set up their factory. And today you see the difference between Sindoor and Sanand. You go to Sanand, you see prosperity. Sanand hasn't become Singapore, but it is far more prosperous than Sindoor. And in Sindoor, if you go, you find those people who uprooted Tata Motors now praying for Tata Motors to come back. I think the day Indian citizen recognizes that Sindoor model is not good for them, it is just good for vested interest, and they adopt Sanand model, our problems will get sorted out.
Yes, agree with you totally on that. Okay, Nilesh, the next question is on interest rates. What is your view on interest rates for the next 2 to 3 years?
I think interest rates are slowly and steadily rising. They are rising because inflation is likely to pick up based on commodity prices, based on money supply, based on pricing power with the corporate India. However, the rise is not likely to be a straight line. It's more likely to be a pendulum. The RBI will intervene at various levels of interest rates, verbal intervention, market intervention. They will try to influence rise of interest rates in a regular manner. So we are going to see a scenario where interest rates are moving up and down in a pendulum fashion. But if I have to take a guess, the 31st March 2022 10-year yield will undoubtedly be higher than 31st March 2021 yield by probably about 35 to 50 basis points.
Okay. Nilesh, there is another question on gold. What is your view on gold and what allocation should investors have in their portfolios?
So we have seen how speculative interest can pull up the price of a instrument or a asset class. Gold generally does well when interest rates are falling and liquidity is high. Between 2008 to 2011, gold prices moved from $750 to $1,900. This year, we have seen gold moving from $1,450 to $2,000 and correcting to $1,750. I think at this point of time, gold is a good investment opportunity. Over the next 2, 3 years, we will see gold prices giving better return than fixed income. Generally, gold prices benefit in high liquidity and low interest rate scenario. We have seen marginal pickup in interest rates, and which is why gold prices have corrected. But after that, gold prices should start moving up.
Okay, that sounds good. There is also a question on cryptocurrencies. That is the hot topic on news these days. Would you like to answer that? What is your view on cryptocurrency?
So one, as professional fund manager, you can do a research on an underlying theme and make a recommendation. In cryptocurrency, there is no underlying theme. Today, it's being bought by people who believe price will rise tomorrow, and hence they are buying. The whole cycle can work in reverse as much. Today, cryptocurrencies is being invested by people who wants to go below the radar of central banks and investigative agencies. Now, tomorrow, if central banks and investigative agencies come hard towards it, we don't know what will be their interest. So cryptocurrencies is a high risk assets. They have delivered very good return in the past, but the volatility is fairly high. If you can go for highest risk, highest return kind of investment, then cryptocurrencies can be looked at. But one thing, Rajul, you must remember that this cryptocurrencies have huge risk from a safekeeping point of view. Forget the price volatility.
Yeah.
We constantly hear exchanges which have been hacked and all cryptocurrencies taken out. We have seen hard disk crashing and cryptocurrencies gone. We have seen, keys being stolen and cryptocurrencies gone. So do remember
Even
that
people have
apart from
forgotten their passwords and they cannot retrieve their assets.
So
Yeah.
focus on safekeeping as much as you focus on price movement of cryptocurrencies.
Correct. So Nilesh, to sum up our discussion for today, let's take this last question. India aspires to be a $5 trillion economy. In that context, where do you see India 5 years from now? And there was another question where they asked, where do you see India 2 years from now? Both, from an equity market perspective and maybe, as a country as a whole GDP perspective.
So if we execute the budget, then I see in a 5-year India probably be somewhere around $6 trillion GDP. We will exceed $5 trillion.
We'll double in 5 years.
Will double or more in 5 years time frame. But that requires efficient execution of the intent of the budget. And what are those intent? It's a budget about made in India, make in India. It's budget about equipping our entrepreneurs to go and conquer the world. It's a budget where we take out government from business and we hand it over to private entrepreneurs. It's a budget which is making India infrastructure surplus. Now, these are tall tasks. If you want to grow double in 5 years, your compounding rate has to be 12%, which India has never achieved in its life. The best run rate which we had was about 9%. So I'm expecting 33% more than 9% for next 5 years to achieve that goal. It's an ambitious target and it can only be achieved if the intent of the budget is executed flawlessly on the ground.
I remember Raghuram Rajan used to say that if we can keep inflation under control below 4%, then our GDP, real GDP, we can see in double digits. So maybe with the right trigger and the right push and the right base, we should be able to deliver that. So thanks a lot, Nilesh, for your time and some great insights on the markets. I'm sure all of our guests today found a few takeaways from today's discussion. I would like to thank all of you for sparing your time on a Saturday morning. May I request you all to please take 30 seconds to fill out the feedback form, which will appear on your browser as you exit this webinar. Nilesh, do you want to say something?
No.
In closing remarks.
All I want to say, Rajul, is that this is probably 2003 to 2007 kind of period where growth will be higher than expected, corporate earnings will be higher than expected, and hence market price will be higher than expected. Undoubtedly, in this journey, you will see correction. Even between 2003 to 2007, if I remember the dates correctly, end of 2005, we had seen 30% correction, Sensex coming from 12,000 to 9,000. There will be ups and downs, but please stay invested and benefit in this growth story.
agree with you completely. Thank you, everyone, and have yourself a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much, Nilesh, for your presence.
Thank you, Rajal. Take care.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.